What would you do if you discovered that the foundations of your town's most respected family were built upon bones and secrets too horrific to imagine? How far would you go to uncover the truth, even if that truth threatened to unravel the very fabric of your community? On a bitter January morning in 1901, as snow blanketed the rugged hills surrounding the mining town of Colwood, West Virginia, three men, working to expand the Blackstone family mausoleum, made a discovery that would haunt the region for generations to come. What began as routine excavation work at the old Blackstone Cemetery would eventually expose a dark chapter in West Virginia history, one that many powerful people had worked desperately to keep buried. The foreman, Elijah Harmon, a 34-year-old stonemason with calloused hands and a reputation for discretion, had been hired by the Blackstone Mining Company to add a new wing to the family crypt. The Blackstones were coal barons who had built Colwood from nothing, transforming an untamed valley into a company town that lived and died by the fortunes of the mines they owned. When Harrison Blackstone, the family patriarch, passed away just after Christmas in 1900, his son Edward commissioned an expansion to their already imposing family mausoleum. We were digging the new foundation, maybe 7 feet down, when my shovel hit something that wasn't rock or dirt. Harmon would later testify in court documents that remained sealed until 1976. It made a hollow sound like knocking on wood. I called over the boys, thinking we'd found an old tree root or maybe some kind of buried debris. But when we cleared away more soil, we saw it was a small wooden door set into the stone. What the workers discovered beneath the Blackstone mausoleum wasn't on any blueprint or town record. Hidden beneath the official crypt lay an unauthorized ossuary, a secret chamber filled with human remains. But unlike traditional ossuaries used for respectful storage of bones, what the workers uncovered appeared to be something far more sinister. According to the testimony of Thomas Quinn, one of the laborers present that day, the door was secured with 3 heavy iron locks. "Mr. Harmon sent me to fetch the sheriff," Quinn stated in his sworn affidavit. "He told us not to touch anything else until authorities arrived. I remember running through the snow, my heart pounding something fierce. I knew we'd found something evil. You can feel that sort of thing in your bones." Sheriff William Crawford arrived at the cemetery within the hour, accompanied by Dr. Samuel Merritt, the county coroner. Crawford, a gruff man who had served as sheriff of McDowell County for nearly 15 years, was known to be closely aligned with the interests of the Blackstone family. Nevertheless, what he discovered that day apparently tested even his loyalty to the town's founding family. The Colwood Gazette, the local newspaper, made no mention of the discovery in the following days. In fact, the only public record of the event comes from the personal journal of Dr. Merritt, which was discovered among his effects after his death in 1927. January 7, 1901. Called to the Blackstone Cemetery on a matter Sheriff Crawford described as sensitive. What we found beneath the family mausoleum defies explanation and basic human decency. The chamber contained the remains of at least 23 individuals, arranged in a manner suggesting ritualistic purpose rather than respectful interment. Most disturbing were the marks visible on many of the bones, evidence of cutting, scraping, and other modifications that could not have occurred after natural death. Sheriff Crawford has ordered the scene sealed and placed under guard. He has also sent a telegram to the state authorities in Charleston. May God have mercy on whoever is responsible for this abomination. Within 24 hours of the discovery, 2 agents from the newly formed Bureau of Investigation, a precursor to the Federal Bureau of Investigation, arrived in Colwood. Their presence, unusual for what might otherwise have been considered a local matter, suggested that the implications of the discovery extended beyond the borders of McDowell County. Special Agent Robert Miller and his partner, Special Agent James Cooper, took control of the investigation from the local authorities. Their arrival coincided with a sudden change in Sheriff Crawford's demeanor. According to witnesses, the once confident lawman appeared nervous and withdrawn after his initial meeting with the federal agents. Martha Simmons, who worked as a housekeeper at the Colwood Hotel, where the agent stayed, later recounted overhearing a heated conversation between Crawford and Agent Miller. The sheriff kept saying, "You don't understand who you're dealing with. These people have connections all the way to Washington." And the agent, tall man with a mustache, he just said real calm like, "That's precisely why we're here, Sheriff." After that, Crawford looked like he'd seen a ghost. As news of the federal presence spread through town, Edward Blackstone, who had inherited control of the family mining empire upon his father's death, publicly expressed shock at the discovery and pledged full cooperation with the investigation. In a statement published in the Charleston Gazette on January 10, 1901, Blackstone claimed no knowledge of the hidden chamber. "The Blackstone family is appalled by this macabre discovery," he was quoted as saying. "This chamber was certainly not part of the original mausoleum construction commissioned by my grandfather in 1872. We are as eager as anyone to discover how and when this abhorrent space was created, and who is responsible for its contents." Despite his public cooperation, documents later revealed that Edward Blackstone immediately hired a team of 5 attorneys from Charleston and retained the services of the Pinkerton Detective Agency, not to assist with the investigation, but apparently to monitor and potentially counteract it. The town of Colwood, meanwhile, found itself divided. The Blackstone Mining Company employed nearly 80% of the working men in the area. Criticizing the family meant risking not just your livelihood, but potentially your home, as most residences in Colwood were company-owned. Still, whispers began to circulate, old rumors and half-forgotten stories that had previously been dismissed as idle gossip. Clara Wilson, who operated the town's telephone switchboard, became an unexpected repository of these whispered accounts. In a series of letters to her sister in Pittsburgh, preserved in the West Virginia State Archives, Wilson documented the growing unease in the community. January 15, 1901. "The whole town is talking, though never above a whisper, and never when they think company men might be listening. Old Mrs. Holloway, who worked as a cook for the Blackstones in the 80s, told me today that Harrison Blackstone used to hold strange meetings in the main house on nights of the new moon. Men would arrive after dark, wearing long coats and hats pulled low, and wouldn't leave until dawn. She said Harrison's wife, Catherine, would take to her bed with headaches on those nights, and once confided in Mrs. Holloway that she feared her husband was involved in ungodly practices. I don't know what to believe, but something terrible surely happened here." As agents Miller and Cooper continued their investigation, they began interviewing long-time Colwood residents, particularly focusing on individuals who had worked for the Blackstone family in various capacities over the years. Most were reluctant to speak, but a few provided information that helped establish a timeline of suspicious activities. Harold Jenkins, who had worked as the Blackstone family driver from 1878 to 1896, provided testimony that would later prove crucial. "Mr. Harrison had me drive him to remote locations at odd hours, usually with 1 or 2 other gentlemen I wasn't familiar with," Jenkins stated in a sworn affidavit dated January 23, 1901. "There was a particular cabin up in the hills, about 15 miles from town, that we visited perhaps once every month or 2. He would have me wait with the carriage sometimes for hours. Once, in the winter of 1888, I heard screams coming from inside the cabin. When I mentioned this to Mr. Harrison on the return journey, he increased my salary by $20 per month and reminded me that my position required absolute discretion." The cabin Jenkins described was located on Blackstone Mining Company property near an abandoned mine shaft known locally as the Hollow. When agents visited the location on January 25th, they discovered the cabin had been recently burned to the ground. The timing suggested an attempt to destroy evidence, though no direct connection to the Blackstone family could be established. The investigation took a dramatic turn on February 2nd, when Dr. Merritt completed his preliminary examination of the remains found in the hidden chamber. His findings, documented in a report sent to the Bureau of Investigation headquarters in Washington, painted a disturbing picture. The remains represent 23 individuals of varying ages, including 4 children, approximately age 6 to 12 years. Analysis of clothing fragments and personal effects suggests the deaths occurred over a period spanning approximately 25 years, with the most recent interment occurring perhaps 3 to 4 months ago. Many of the remains show evidence of restraint prior to death, with rope fibers embedded in wrist and ankle bones. Most disturbing are the systematic markings on the bones themselves, precise incisions and symbols carved with surgical precision, consistent across multiple remains despite the difference in time of death. These markings correspond to no medical procedure or known burial practice with which I am familiar. Dr. Merritt's report also noted that several of the remains bore small metal objects embedded in the bones, thin plates of copper inscribed with symbols that he described as reminiscent of alchemical or occult notation. These objects were collected as evidence and sent to Washington for further analysis. The discovery of children's remains shifted public opinion in Colwood dramatically. While many had been willing to reserve judgment or even defend the Blackstone name, the thought of children being victimized broke through even the strongest company loyalty. When news of this detail leaked, presumably through someone with access to Dr. Merritt's findings, the atmosphere in town changed from uneasy silence to simmering anger. On February 10th, a Sunday, Reverend Thomas Parker of the Colwood Methodist Church delivered a sermon that, while never mentioning the Blackstones by name, condemned those who would sacrifice the innocent upon altars of greed and ungodly power. According to multiple accounts, Edward Blackstone, who was in attendance with his wife and 3 children, as was their custom, stood up midway through the sermon and led his family out of the church. The following day, Reverend Parker was found dead in the church rectory, apparently the victim of a stroke. While Dr. Merritt signed the death certificate listing natural causes, rumors immediately began circulating that the Reverend had been poisoned. No autopsy was performed, and Parker was buried within 48 hours, an unusually quick interment that only fueled speculation. The sudden death of the Reverend, coming so soon after his veiled condemnation of the Blackstones, had a chilling effect on the community. People who had begun speaking openly about the investigation once again lowered their voices, and several individuals who had agreed to provide statements to the federal agents abruptly changed their minds. Agent Miller, apparently recognizing that the climate of fear in Colwood was hampering their investigation, made a strategic decision. On February 15th, he sent a telegram to his superiors requesting additional personnel and resources, while simultaneously arranging for key witnesses to be temporarily relocated to Charleston for their safety. Among those relocated was Margaret Blackstone, Harrison's younger sister, who had lived in relative seclusion in a small house on the outskirts of town for decades. At 73 years old, Margaret was the oldest living member of the Blackstone family, and according to Agent Miller's notes, potentially our most valuable witness. If she can be persuaded to speak about family matters, Margaret Blackstone had long been considered eccentric by the people of Colwood. Unlike her brother, who had embraced the trappings of wealth and power, Margaret lived simply, almost ascetically. She rarely attended social functions and was known to spend long hours walking alone in the forests surrounding the town, collecting plants and minerals for what she described as natural studies. Her relationship with her brother had reportedly been strained, though the exact nature of their disagreement was not public knowledge. What is known is that Margaret had been excluded from the family business and received only a modest allowance from the vast Blackstone fortune. On February 20th, after several days of interviews with agents Miller and Cooper in Charleston, Margaret Blackstone provided a sworn statement that would prove to be the turning point in the investigation. The complete transcript of this statement remained sealed by court order until 2010, but portions were read into the record during subsequent legal proceedings. I first became aware of Harrison's involvement in the order in 1876, Margaret testified. Her father had just died, and Harrison had taken control of the mining operations. A man named Frederick Winters came to visit, a well-dressed gentleman from Philadelphia who claimed to represent a group of investors. Harrison changed after that meeting. He began collecting strange books and corresponding with people in Europe, Germany and Austria primarily. By 1878, he had converted the east wing of the house into a private study that no one, not even his wife, was permitted to enter. Margaret went on to describe how, over the next several years, Harrison became increasingly secretive and began hosting regular gatherings of what he referred to only as the Order. These meetings, she explained, coincided with specific astronomical events, solstices, equinoxes, and certain planetary alignments that seemed significant to the group. In the beginning, I believed it to be merely a fraternal organization, perhaps similar to the Freemasons, her statement continued. But in the winter of 1882, I discovered a journal Harrison had carelessly left in the library. What I read there convinced me that their activities were far darker than I had imagined. They believed that certain rituals, performed under specific conditions with appropriate sacrifices, could extend life and confer power. Harrison wrote of demonstrable success with small animals and expressed eagerness to advance to the next level of the work. Margaret claimed that after discovering the true nature of her brother's activities, she confronted him and threatened to expose the group. Rather than denying her accusations, Harrison allegedly offered her a place within the order. He told me that women rarely had the constitution for the work, but that our bloodline was special, that we carried a hereditary affinity for the mysteries they were exploring. When I refused and reiterated my threat to expose them, he reminded me that no one would believe the allegations of a spinster sister against a respected businessman. Then he made it clear that my continued financial support, and indeed my safety, depended on my absolute silence. Frightened but unwilling to abandon her moral convictions entirely, Margaret claimed to have begun keeping a secret record of her observations. Over the years, she documented unusual deliveries to the Blackstone house, strange visitors, and unexplained disappearances in the surrounding communities, particularly of transient workers and, occasionally, children from the more remote homesteads in the region. I was a coward, her statement concluded. I knew but did not act. I suspected but did not confirm. I told myself that without proof, any accusation would only result in my own ruin. Now I must live with the knowledge that my silence enabled decades of unspeakable acts. All I can offer now is the truth, though it comes far too late for those poor souls. Armed with Margaret Blackstone's testimony and the physical evidence from the ossuary, Agents Miller and Cooper prepared to make their case against Edward Blackstone and several other prominent Colwood citizens, allegedly involved in the order. They had established that the secret chamber beneath the mausoleum had been constructed in 1879, during the original building's construction, but hidden from the official plans. They had documented a pattern of disappearances corresponding to the estimated times of death for the remains found in the chamber, and they had begun to unravel the network of influence that had protected the Order's activities for decades. What they didn't anticipate was the extent of that influence, or how desperately those implicated would fight to maintain their secrets. On the morning of February 27th, as the agents prepared to present their evidence to a federal judge in Charleston to obtain arrest warrants, they received an unexpected visitor at their hotel. Judge William Hollister, the senior federal judge for the district and the man who would have presided over any eventual trial, requested a private meeting. According to Agent Miller's personal journal, found among his effects after his death, the meeting was brief but disturbing. Judge Hollister advised us in the strongest possible terms to abandon our investigation, Miller wrote. When I informed him that we had already compiled sufficient evidence to seek indictments against Edward Blackstone and at least 6 other individuals, his demeanor changed from persuasive to threatening. "You have no idea what forces you're challenging," he told us. "This goes beyond Colwood, beyond West Virginia. There are people involved who could have you both disappeared with a single telegram." When we remained firm in our resolve to proceed, he left with a final warning. "They don't just kill you. They erase you completely." Alarmed but undeterred, the agents immediately telegraphed their superiors in Washington, requesting emergency protection for their witnesses and expedited processing of their case. They received no response. When they attempted to place a telephone call to the Bureau headquarters, they were informed that the lines were down due to winter storms. Increasingly concerned, Miller and Cooper decided to divide their responsibilities. Cooper would remain in Charleston to guard Margaret Blackstone and the physical evidence, while Miller would personally travel to Washington to report directly to their superiors. Miller never reached Washington. His body was discovered 3 days later in a ravine near the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad tracks outside Martinsburg, West Virginia. The local coroner ruled his death an accident, suggesting he had fallen from the train. However, a secondary examination, performed at the insistence of Agent Cooper, revealed evidence of a struggle and a small puncture wound at the base of Miller's skull that had initially been overlooked. In Charleston, Cooper found himself increasingly isolated. The hotel, where he and Margaret Blackstone were staying, reported multiple inquiries from government officials seeking information about their rooms and schedules. Mysterious men in dark suits were observed watching the building, and most alarmingly, Judge Hollister issued a surprise ruling questioning the Bureau's jurisdiction in the case and ordering all evidence to be transferred to state authorities. Recognizing the precariousness of their situation, Cooper made a desperate decision. In the middle of the night on March 3rd, he and Margaret Blackstone fled Charleston, taking with them only the most essential evidence: her written testimony, Dr. Merritt's report, and the strange copper plates found with the remains. Their destination was not Washington, where Cooper had come to believe the order's influence had compromised even the Bureau's leadership, but rather New York City. There, Cooper intended to contact the press, specifically Joseph Pulitzer's New York World, known for its exposure of corruption and willingness to challenge powerful interests. The journey to New York was fraught with danger. According to Margaret Blackstone's subsequent account, they changed trains multiple times and traveled under assumed names. They believed they were being followed, though whether by agents of the order or compromised law enforcement was unclear. They arrived in New York on March 7th and immediately sought out Raymond Wilson, a journalist at the New York World known for his investigative work. Wilson agreed to meet them at his office the following morning. But when Cooper and Margaret arrived for the appointment, they were informed that Wilson had been found dead in his apartment that morning, an apparent suicide. A note, allegedly in his handwriting, cited personal and professional disappointments as the reason for his desperate act. "It was too perfect," Margaret later wrote in a letter to Clara Wilson, no relation to the journalist. "The timing, the convenient explanation, even the fact that his death prevented us from being seen in the newspaper offices. We knew then that the order's reach was greater than we had imagined. They were always one step ahead, as if they could see our intentions before we had even formed them." With nowhere else to turn, Cooper made a last, desperate move. He entrusted copies of their evidence to 3 separate individuals: a lawyer in New York, a former colleague in the Bureau whom he believed to be trustworthy, and a journalist with a smaller but respected publication, the Boston Evening Transcript. Each was given instructions to publish the information or forward it to appropriate authorities if they did not receive a specific coded message from Cooper within 30 days. Having established this insurance policy, Cooper and Margaret Blackstone disappeared. Their whereabouts from March 8, 1901, until nearly a year later, remain unknown. No record exists of their travel or activities during this period, leading many researchers to speculate that they lived under assumed identities, possibly in Canada or Europe. What is known is that on January 15, 1902, a package arrived at the offices of the Boston Evening Transcript. It contained all the original evidence Cooper had gathered, along with an additional journal written by Margaret Blackstone detailing their experiences while in hiding. A note from Cooper explained that Margaret had died of pneumonia 2 months earlier, and that he, believing himself to be terminally ill as well, had decided to entrust the complete record to history. The editor of the transcript, after reviewing the materials, took the extraordinary step of publishing a 7-part series titled The Blackstone Horror Secret Society, Ritual Murder and Corruption in West Virginia. The series caused an immediate sensation, though many readers dismissed it as sensationalist fiction rather than investigative journalism. Edward Blackstone publicly denounced the articles as libelous fantasy and threatened legal action against the newspaper. However, the transcript's editor had been careful to present the material as allegations rather than established fact, and Blackstone ultimately declined to pursue a lawsuit that would have required him to testify under oath. The public controversy might have faded into obscurity had it not been for an unexpected development. In April 1902, a young man named Thomas Jenkins came forward, identifying himself as the son of Harold Jenkins, the former Blackstone family driver. Thomas claimed that his father, who had died under mysterious circumstances shortly after providing his statement to agents Miller and Cooper, had left him a sealed package with instructions to open it only in the event that the Blackstone case became public knowledge. The package contained his father's detailed personal journal, spanning nearly 20 years of service to the Blackstone family. More importantly, it included a hand-drawn map showing the location of what Harold Jenkins described as the true chamber, a secret room beneath the cabin in the woods that Harrison Blackstone had frequently visited. My father believed that the ossuary found beneath the mausoleum was merely a repository, a place where remains were stored after they had served their primary purpose, Thomas Jenkins stated in an affidavit provided to federal authorities. The real work, whatever it was, happened at the cabin, and though that structure was burned, my father was convinced that the underground chamber would have survived the fire. Federal authorities, still reeling from the implications of corruption within their own ranks, assembled a new team to investigate Jenkins's claims. This team, operating under unusual secrecy and reporting directly to the Attorney General, traveled to the location indicated on Jenkins's map in May 1902. What they found would transform a sensational but still contestable newspaper story into one of the most disturbing criminal cases in American history. Have you ever wondered what secrets lie beneath the official narratives of America's industrial towns? What dark bargains might have been struck to build the fortunes that shaped our nation? The story of Coalwood continues, a tale that challenges our understanding of history and the lengths to which powerful men will go to protect their ungodly ambitions. The federal team that arrived at the remote cabin site in May of 1902 was unlike any previous law enforcement group assembled for such a case. Led by Special Agent Thaddeus Morgan, a veteran investigator known for his work infiltrating anarchist groups, the team included not just agents, but also Dr. Eleanor Reed, one of the few female physicians working with the government at that time and an expert in forensic science, Professor James Hawthorne, an anthropologist from Columbia University, and Father Michael Donovan, a Catholic priest with specific expertise in obscure religious practices and occult traditions. The unusual composition of the team reflected the government's growing awareness that what they were dealing with in the Blackstone case transcended ordinary criminal activity. This was something that required specialized knowledge to properly document and understand. The site itself appeared unremarkable at first glance. As Thomas Jenkins had indicated, The cabin had been completely destroyed by fire, with only the stone chimney and foundation remaining visible. The surrounding forest had already begun to reclaim the cleared area, with spring undergrowth covering much of the burn scar. The team began by conducting a methodical examination of the visible ruins, mapping the foundation and comparing it to the architectural information provided in Harold Jenkins' journal. According to his notes, the entrance to the underground chamber was located beneath a trap-door in what had been the cabin's root cellar. "We located the cellar entrance on the eastern side of the foundation," Agent Morgan wrote in his official report. "The stone steps leading down were partially collapsed, requiring careful excavation to avoid further damage. At the bottom of the stairs, we found what remained of the cellar proper, a space approximately 12 feet by 15 feet, with walls of fitted stone. The floor was packed earth, now covered in debris from the fire above. The team spent 2 days carefully removing the debris, sifting through it for potential evidence. Their efforts revealed several items of interest: fragments of unusual glassware, small metal implements of unknown purpose, and most significantly, a heavy iron ring set into the packed earth floor in the northwest corner of the cellar. The ring was attached to a wooden trapdoor, heavily reinforced with iron bands," Morgan's report continued. Despite the fire damage to the cabin above, this door remained largely intact, protected by the earth and stone surrounding it. Most telling was the fact that the door was secured with 3 separate locks of unusual design. These were not ordinary padlocks, but rather complex mechanisms that appeared to be of European manufacture. Without the keys, the team was forced to break the locks, a process that took several hours due to their sophisticated construction. When they finally raised the trapdoor, they were met with a rush of stale, cold air and a steep set of stone steps descending into darkness. Dr. Reed's journal, later published in the American Journal of Forensic Medicine, provided a more personal account of what followed. As we descended the stone staircase, the temperature dropped noticeably. The air had a peculiar quality, not simply the mustiness one might expect from an underground space, but something more acrid, with metallic undertones that made my throat constrict. Our lanterns revealed a passageway roughly 7 feet high and 5 feet wide, lined with dressed stone of remarkable craftsmanship. The walls bore faint traces of pigment, suggesting they had once been painted or possibly inscribed, though time and moisture had rendered any specific designs illegible. The passage extended approximately 30 feet before opening into a circular chamber approximately 20 feet in diameter. What we found there defies easy description, and even now, months later, I find my scientific training inadequate to fully process what we witnessed. The chamber, as documented in the team's detailed reports and photographs, had been designed for a specific purpose. At its center stood a stone table or altar, its surface carved with channels leading to a central basin. The walls were covered with intricate engravings, symbols that Professor Hawthorne would later identify as a mixture of alchemical notation, corrupted Hermetic texts, and what appeared to be a unique symbolic language specific to the order. Most disturbing were the implements found arranged on shelves cut into the rock walls, surgical tools, restraints, and specialized equipment that suggested a horrific blend of medical procedure and ritual practice. The technical precision of these tools indicates European craftsmanship of the highest quality, Dr. Reed noted. Many bear makers' marks from surgical instrument manufacturers in Vienna and Berlin. Of particular note is the collection of cranial drills and bone saws, all showing evidence of extensive use. Alongside these recognizable medical instruments were others whose purpose I cannot determine. Curved blades with symbolic engravings, crystal lenses set in gold frames, and vessels of unusual configuration. As the team continued their examination, they discovered a smaller adjoining chamber accessed through a narrow archway on the eastern wall. This secondary space contained row upon row of shelves, holding hundreds of glass jars, many still intact despite the passage of time. Father Donovan's contribution to the official record provides the most detailed description of this discovery. The preservation room, as I have come to think of it, represented the true horror of this place. Each jar contained human tissue, organs, bone fragments, sections of brain, suspended in a clear solution that had prevented decomposition. Most disturbing was the methodical organization. Each specimen was meticulously labeled with a date, a symbol corresponding to those found in the main chamber, and what appeared to be a case number. The earliest dated specimen was from 1879, the most recent from December 1900, just weeks before the discovery of the ossuary that initiated this investigation. By my count, the collection represented parts harvested from at least 87 distinct individuals over a 21-year period. The team spent 7 days documenting every aspect of the underground complex, creating detailed maps, photographs, and inventories of all items found. Their work was conducted under extraordinary security measures, with armed guards posted at the site perimeter and all materials transported under escort to a secure facility in Washington. What emerged from their investigation was a picture far more terrible than even the sensationalist newspaper accounts had suggested. The Blackstone family, or more specifically Harrison Blackstone, and later his son Edward, had been at the center of an organization dedicated to what they termed transcendental biology, a perverse blend of occult practice and pseudoscientific experimentation aimed at extending human life and developing abilities beyond normal human limitations. Professor Hawthorne's analysis of the symbolic language and the journals recovered from the site revealed the group's core beliefs. They appeared to operate under the conviction that the human body contained untapped energies or essences that could be extracted, refined, and transferred through specific procedures. Their practices combined elements of ancient mystery religions, medieval alchemy, and more modern scientific approaches. Central to their belief system was the idea that certain individuals, particularly children and those of pure bloodlines, contained more potent forms of this essence, making them ideal subjects for their work. The rituals conducted in the underground chamber were designed to extract this essence while the subject was still living, as they believed death diminished its potency. The extracted materials were then preserved using techniques that combined chemical preservation with ritualistic elements intended to maintain their metaphysical properties. Most chilling were the detailed records kept by the Order, documenting each procedure with clinical precision. These records included information about the subjects, primarily transient workers, immigrants, and occasionally children from remote homesteads or neighboring counties who would not be immediately missed. The documentation extended to observations about the quality of materials harvested from each subject, and notes on the effects when these materials were later used in secondary procedures. Dr. Reed's forensic examination of the preserved specimens confirmed the horrific reality behind these records. The tissue samples show evidence of having been removed while the subjects were alive, not post-mortem. Microscopic examination reveals cellular patterns consistent with surgical extraction from living organisms, followed by immediate chemical preservation. Many of the brain tissue samples show evidence of precise surgical technique, with specific regions targeted for removal, particularly the pineal gland, which features prominently in their writings as a supposed center of metaphysical energy. As the team completed their documentation of the site, a parallel investigation was underway to identify the victims and track the full membership of the Order. This effort revealed that the organization extended far beyond Coalwood, with members in positions of influence throughout West Virginia, Pennsylvania, and as far away as New York and Boston. A ledger found hidden within a hollowed section of stone in the main chamber contained a membership roster coded by initials and numbers rather than full names. However, cross-referencing these codes with other documents allowed investigators to identify 43 confirmed members, including judges, doctors, politicians, and industrial leaders. The investigation into victim identities proved more challenging. Many of those targeted by the order had been selected precisely because they had few connections and would not be missed. However, the meticulous record-keeping of the order itself provided some answers. Each subject had been assigned a number, with basic information about their origin, age, and any distinguishing characteristics that might have made them particularly valuable to the group's purposes. Through these records, investigators were able to put names to 17 of the victims. Among them was Catherine Miller, a 12-year-old girl who had disappeared from her family's farm near Beckley in 1896. The Miller family had reported her missing, but with limited law enforcement resources and the isolated nature of their homestead, the investigation had quickly gone cold. Catherine's parents, still living in the same modest farmhouse in 1902, were among the first to be contacted by Agent Morgan's team. Their reaction was documented in Morgan's personal notes. Mr. Miller sat in complete silence as I explained the circumstances, under which we believed his daughter had died. Mrs. Miller asked only one question. Did she suffer? I could not bring myself to answer truthfully. Instead, I assured her that justice would finally be served. Mr. Miller then spoke for the first time, saying, "There's no justice that can touch the kind of men who would do such things." I fear he may be right. As the federal investigation proceeded through the summer of 1902, the question of how to prosecute the case became increasingly complex. Many of those implicated were among the most powerful men in the region, with connections reaching to the highest levels of government. More troubling still was the evidence suggesting that certain federal officials had helped suppress the earlier investigation. A decisive moment came in August when Attorney General Philander Knox personally took charge of the case. Knox, who had been appointed by President Theodore Roosevelt just months earlier, recognized the Blackstone investigation as an opportunity to demonstrate the federal government's commitment to rooting out corruption and holding the powerful accountable. In a confidential memo to the Special Investigation Team dated August 12th, Knox outlined his strategy. The nature of this case presents extraordinary challenges, not least of which is the influence wielded by many of the suspects. We must proceed with absolute secrecy until we are prepared to make simultaneous arrests of all principal figures. Any premature disclosure risks not only the destruction of evidence, but potential retaliation against witnesses and investigators. Furthermore, given the bizarre and sensational aspects of the case, we must focus our prosecution on charges that will be readily understood by a jury and less susceptible to being dismissed as fantastical. While the occult elements and pseudoscientific practices are central to understanding the group's motivations, our legal strategy will emphasize the provable crimes of kidnapping, murder, and conspiracy. Under Knox's direction, the investigation accelerated. By early September, federal agents had compiled enough evidence to secure indictments against 28 individuals, including Edward Blackstone, Judge William Hollister, and several other prominent figures in West Virginia society. The arrests, carried out in a coordinated operation on September 15, 1902, sent shockwaves through the region. Newspapers across the country carried headlines about the Blackstone conspiracy and the West Virginia horror, though few publications included the full details of what had been discovered in the underground chamber. The New York Times, in its September 16th edition, offered a relatively restrained account. Federal authorities yesterday arrested Edward Blackstone, prominent West Virginia industrialist, along with more than 24 others in connection with what is being described as one of the most shocking criminal conspiracies in the nation's history. The charges include multiple counts of kidnapping and murder spanning more than 20 years. Sources close to the investigation indicate that the crimes were committed as part of a secret society operating in the coal regions of southern West Virginia, though the precise nature and purpose of this organization remain unclear. Other publications were less circumspect. The Philadelphia Inquirer ran a front-page story with the headline, "Blood Cult in West Virginia Mountains. Wealthy coal baron-led secret society in ritual murders." The article included lurid speculation about cannibalism and satanic worship, much of which was inaccurate, but which nonetheless captured the public's horrified fascination. The reaction in Colwood itself was complex. Many residents refused to believe the accusations against the Blackstone family, who had provided employment and built the town's schools, church, and hospital. Others, particularly those who had lost loved ones to unexplained disappearances over the years, felt a grim vindication. Clara Wilson, the telephone operator whose letters had documented the town's earlier whispers, wrote to her sister on September 20th. "The town is divided like I've never seen. Some folks are packing up to leave, saying they can't live in a place built on such evil. Others are defending Mr. Edward, saying it's all a government plot to take control of the mines. The company store was nearly empty yesterday. People are stocking up like a storm's coming. In a way, I suppose it is. As the case moved toward trial, several of those arrested began to cooperate with prosecutors in exchange for leniency. Dr. Charles Winters, a physician from Charleston, who had been involved with the order since 1888, provided particularly valuable testimony, explaining the evolution of the group's practices and Harrison Blackstone's central role in establishing their belief system. According to Winters' deposition given on October 10th, Harrison had been initiated into a similar organization during a trip to Austria in the 1870s. Harrison spoke often of his time in Vienna and the revelations he experienced there. He described meeting a group of scholars and physicians who had rediscovered ancient techniques for extending human life and enhancing human capabilities. These techniques required material harvested from subjects with specific qualities: youth, vitality, and what Harrison called untainted lineage. When he returned to America, he was determined to continue this work. He believed that the isolation of his mining community provided the perfect environment, a place where he had complete control and where certain disappearances would go unquestioned. He began by recruiting men he thought would be sympathetic to his vision, physicians like myself, men of science and ambition who might be tempted by the promise of knowledge beyond ordinary human understanding. Winters went on to describe how the order had refined its techniques over the years, moving from crude early experiments to the sophisticated procedures documented in the underground chamber. In the beginning, the work was primitive and often failed. Subjects died too quickly, or the extracted essences degraded before they could be properly utilized. Harrison was obsessive about improving our methods, corresponding regularly with his European counterparts and importing specialized equipment at great expense. By 1890, we had developed procedures that Harrison claimed were producing measurable results. He himself was the primary recipient of the treatments, which involved the introduction of processed extracts from our subjects into his own body through a series of injections and transfusions. He claimed these treatments had cured his rheumatism, improved his eyesight, and given him unusual mental clarity and vigor despite his advancing age. When asked about Edward Blackstone's involvement, Winters confirmed that Harrison had gradually initiated his son into the order's inner circle. Edward was initially reluctant. I recall him arguing with his father about the morality of their work when he first learned the full extent of it in 1893 or 94. But Harrison was persuasive, and Edward's objections seemed to wane as he observed his father's apparent benefits from the treatments. By 1898, after Harrison suffered a minor stroke, Edward became more directly involved, apparently concerned that his father's work would be lost if he died before passing on all his knowledge. Winter's testimony, along with that of other cooperating members, painted a picture of an organization that had begun as a quasi-scientific pursuit before evolving into something that combined elements of a religious cult, a medical experiment, and a criminal enterprise. At its core was the Blackstone family's belief that they were pioneering techniques that would eventually transform human existence, a goal that, in their minds, justified any means necessary.